The Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Alt Hero number 1. You know, the news that is coming out about what happened during the Trump campaign and the way that the Bush family has been behind the CIA and FBI penetration of every presidential campaign from 1980 on is absolutely astonishing. You know, it's really remarkable when you see the full extent of the way in which the deep state has been attempting to manipulate and limit the choices of the American people. And this is really serious stuff here, because what we're seeing is that there is no bottom to this. You know, the way that we know that this is incredibly serious is that the Washington Post and the New York Times have taken this absolutely bizarre angle where they're trying to say this guy is such a incredibly important source. This is such a incredibly important spy that his identity cannot be revealed without putting the entire nation state at risk. You know, that's the way they're trying to spin it is, well, we can't let you know about this. And the ironic thing is, there is actually a kernel of truth in that deceit there, because this is going to fundamentally change the way that everyone looks at the political system. It's not so much a matter of national security, it's a matter of national credibility. And so the idea that someone like Stefan Halper has been interfering with American elections since 1980 is astonishing, and it already demonstrates that what's going on with the Trump administration and what was going on with the Trump campaign was not only nothing to do with the Russians, nothing to do with any wrongdoing on Trump's part or any of the people in his campaign. The corruption and the collusion was all taking place within the FBI. You know, I mean, this is so far beyond Watergate. You know, it's not an exaggeration to say that it's 1,000 times bigger than Watergate. I mean, it is indicative of a massive core of corruption at the heart of the entire United States system. And so this is going to have ramifications that are not going to just last a week or a month or so. This is something that is going to potentially revolutionize the way that the U.S. government is constituted. And, you know, we don't know yet how far this is going to go. But what we now know is that the full extent is much deeper than even the most pessimistic conspiracy theorists had ever imagined. I mean, I'm pretty skeptical. I'm pretty skeptical about the extent of the corruption in the States. I'm used to Italy. The corruption's pretty open, and I've always said, because I talk to Italians obviously all the time, and they sometimes ask, how do you find it different in Italy compared to the United States? And one thing I always tell them is, in Italy, the corruption is open. Everybody knows that the politicians are corrupt for the most part. Everybody knows that people that criminals are holding office. I don't know what the number is now, but there are literally dozens of Italian, the equivalent of congressmen, dozens of Italian parliamentarians who have actually been convicted of various crimes. Not just accused, not just indicted, but convicted of various crimes. And they're still seated in Parliament, and they still keep getting reelected. In fact, they kind of have to keep getting reelected because the way the system is set up there, they can't actually be sentenced to anything until they're no longer in office. And so they stay in office as long as they can. And of course, because the entire system is corrupt, nobody takes the convictions terribly seriously, as we saw with Berlusconi. And so, now this isn't a good thing. I'm not saying that this is a good thing. I'm just saying that everybody knows it. Nobody is under any illusions about the politicians not being corrupt and so forth. On the other hand, in the United States, people have a completely false notion of how the system works. In the United States, a lot of people are still true believers. But it's not true. The system in the United States is every bit as corrupt as you see in Italy. It is every bit as corrupt as you see in various other countries that we consider to be banana republics. And yet we don't know it. And even those of us who knew it, my father was involved in Republican politics back in the 1980s. And so I knew that politics was corrupt. I knew that the people who were involved in politics were entirely corrupt. I remember the guy who ended up becoming the governor of Minnesota had come to my parents' office and was talking to them and absolutely assured them of his position on a certain issue. And what was amazing was he went out and did a media interview not 15 minutes later and said precisely the opposite thing than what I had heard him tell my mother, just 15 minutes before. And so I found that kind of amusing. One of the reasons why I've always been very cynical about U.S. politics. But the thing that's amazing is that I wasn't anywhere nearly cynical enough. It was just astonishing to me to read these revelations about what Stefan Halper has been doing since the 1980 elections. I mean, this is absolutely and utterly remarkable. And, you know, a lot of people are pessimistic that anything's going to happen. A lot of people are saying, oh, well, what difference does it make now that we know? What is anyone going to do about this? But the reality is that it is bringing the end of the neoliberal world order closer. And so the neoliberal world order has already failed. Even people who were part of constructing it and people who are true believers in it, like Henry Kissinger, they know this. You know, I mean, when you've got people like Francis Fukuyama, who is a firm and strong believer in the neoliberal world order, and he famously pronounced the end of history. And not 15 years later, he's been desperately trying to walk back his words and claim that he meant something other than his actual meaning, and so forth, because it is so readily apparent to everyone that the neoliberal world order is failing. But what we're seeing here is that in addition to it failing, people are increasingly unable to even believe in the false front that it presents. And so, it's really, really remarkable to see how much this has changed, how much people's perceptions have changed, not just in the United States, but around the world. Think about this. Think about what this is doing in Russia. Think about what this is doing in China. Even more importantly, think about what this is doing in all the countries like Indonesia, in countries that are like Korea, in countries that are currently making decisions about which way they are going to go. And the only thing that the U.S. really had